and International Development. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule selon...
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application.
To Standing Order 106, subsection 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025, the committee is now meeting to study Canada's Africa strategy. I'd like to welcome our witnesses today from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Cheryl Urban, Assistant Deputy Minister, Africa Branch, Andrew Smith, Director General, Pan-African Affairs Bureau, Susan Stephan, Director General, West Africa and Maghreb Bureau, and Sarah Nichols, Director, Central and Southern Africa, Bilateral Relations Division. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will go to we'll proceed with rounds of questions. So I now invite Ms. Cheryl Urban to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Monsieur le Président, honorable député.
Mr. Chairman, honorable members, as the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Africa Branch of Global Affairs Canada, I'm happy to talk to you this afternoon to talk about Canada's engagement in Africa and to talk about the progress achieved in implementing Canada's Africa strategy. On April 10th, 2024, we had the honor of presenting to the committee an update on the governmental approach to the continent. As part of its study entitled A New Era of Partnership, Canada's Engagement in Africa. At that time, Global Affairs Canada was preparing the second high-level dialogue with the African Union Commission, which was held last November. At the same time, the department was mobilizing stakeholders in Canada and in Africa to elaborate an engagement framework, which led to the launch of the Africa Strategy last March. The committee report was an important reference to guide this measure.
And since the strategy's launch in March 2025, we are seeing a rise in global economic turbulence and widening global fault lines. The Government of Canada, in response, is focused on Canadian productivity and economic prosperity and protecting Canadian sovereignty and security. Our government has committed to increase exports with non-U.S. markets and to diversify trade. More than ever, there is a need to build strong economic partnerships with countries around the world. The Africa Strategy underlines the need to focus on mutually beneficial partnerships and provides a framework to advance the priorities of the government today. The strategy aims to strengthen Canada's engagement with Africa towards greater economic cooperation, strengthen peace and security partnerships, enhanced engagement of African diaspora communities in Canada, and international assistance that supports poverty reduction and economic development. La stratégie pour l'Afrique présente le continent.
The Africa Strategy views the continent as a region of opportunities and a key partner to achieve Canada's international priorities. Africa is known for its growing economies, an expanding middle class, and dynamic youth. It is a driver of innovation and entrepreneuriat. It is essential that Canada associate itself with this continent in order to promote security and stability.
The Africa Strategy, Global Affairs Canada continues to respond to this committee's recommendations put forward in your November 2024 report. Nous progressons sur plusieurs frontières dans la mise en œuvre.
We are making a headway in various aspects of the strategy. The government appointed 2 special envoys in order to strengthen our presence on our exchanges with American decision-makers, Marc Diendéré, Special Envoy for Africa, and Marc Lebloy, Special Envoy for North Africa. We're also working to deepen our diplomatic and commercial presence in Africa, further to the recommendations by this committee, particularly by creating a High Commission in Zambia and an embassy in Benin. We are banking on our interpersonal ties uniting Canada and Africa, particularly the fact that we are a member of the group of Francophone nations, which will enable us to take full advantage of partnerships with Francophone African countries, both commercially speaking and politically. This also includes presence in multilateral organizations such as the International Organization of the Francophonie.
and trade and investment engagement across Africa. This hub has been instrumental in coordinating with Canada's missions in Africa to support Canada's private sector on the continent and trade policy priorities such as ongoing foreign investment, promotion, and protection agreement negotiations with Zambia and Tanzania. Recognizing the need to shift from traditional aid relationships towards deeper economic partnerships, we've launched a new Africa Trade and Development Program. A concrete example of this work is the Development Trade Marketplace, organized by Canada's High Commission in Kenya, which took place at the end of October in Ottawa and helped link development partners and Canadian companies looking to do business in Africa and other developing country markets. Trade and development investments build on Canada's long-standing support for the African Continental Free Trade Area, which has involved the African Trade Policy Centre at the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and Canadian partners such as the Trade Facilitation Office Canada and a consortium led by Carleton University's Centre for Trade Policy and Law, providing technical and strategic expertise for the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Canada continues to invest in poverty reduction, building on decades of meaningful investment in areas such as health systems and education, including for girls and women. Meanwhile, Canada continues to provide humanitarian assistance and to undertake political advocacy in conflict and crisis situations as part of our engagement in fragile contexts. We have also continued to strengthen collaboration with the African Union since the signing of the Canada-AUC Memorandum of Understanding at the second high-level dialogue with the Commission last November. Our officials have been working together to advance joint priorities, and a third dialogue is next scheduled to take place in fall of 2026. Notre engagement auprès de la diaspora africaine.
Our engagement with the African diaspora in Canada has grown deeper, particularly to support the economic partnerships and diversification efforts. Since the start of the year, the Africa branch has participated in more than 20 initiatives undertaken by the diaspora in Canada, including our missions network. In June, for instance, the High Commission in Ghana organized the investment and forum for the Ghanaian diaspora with financial institutions and the Ghanaian government. We are also cooperating closely with South Africa, multiplying exchanges, high-level exchanges over the past year as part of our chairmanship of the G7 and G20. These interactions enabled us to consolidate the strategic relationship in order to advance our bilateral interests and support our respective summits, namely that in Kananaskis and the other one which is taking place this week in Johannesburg. Finally, it's important to remember that African voices are essential in order to build inclusive multilateral systems. Canada has actively supported the integration of the African Union into the G20. We invited South Africa to the G7, and we are working with South Africa to support its chairmanship in G20. Together, we are advancing our mutual priorities, particularly in the area of critical minerals and in reducing disaster risk and artificial intelligence. As you can see, we are focusing our efforts on the government's new priorities for prosperity and a shared safe security by deepening our relationships with key African partners and emerging partners. In its implementation, the Africa strategy will continue to adapt to a changing world and to national priorities. With the geopolitical tensions and the growing uncertainty in the world, Canada, guided by its Africa strategy, is engaging as a reliable partner in a spirit of equal-to-equal relationships and mutual benefits. Thank you.
Open the floor to questions, beginning with MP Rood. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all for being here today. My first question is, does this strategy conflict with the budget's stated decrease of $2.7 billion in aid spending? And what problems will a decrease in funding create for a strategy such as this? And how is the department planning to adjust for that?
Thank you very much for that question. What I would say is that the strategy in itself, at the time of its release, was a strategy that was implementable with existing resources. It's all about prioritization and using existing resources to their greatest effect. Even in today's context, when the Government of Canada is focused on consolidating government operations and reducing its expenditures, we can achieve the aims of the Africa strategy. This is a question of having very clear, concrete strategies of where we are going to prioritize, where we move our resources. It's also a matter of doing even more coordination between different government bodies. That would be, for example, between Global Affairs Canada, Export Development Canada, FinDev Canada, et cetera, so that we can multiply our effect. And finally, it's about streamlining our processes and leveraging artificial intelligence, leveraging technology so that we have processes that are more effective, so it is doable with the resources that we have in today's government agenda.
Thank you very much for that answer. So you mentioned streamlining and moving money around from different places. So I'm curious how much new money over and above the existing aid and departmental baselines does the strategy require over the next 5 years? And how will you report return on investment in exports, Canadian jobs supported, and private sector dollars mobilized?
So as I said, it was written in the Africa strategy itself that over the past 5 years, the amount that Canada has contributed bilaterally to Africa over a 5-year period is $4.5 billion. With that amount, that can be used to achieve the aims of the Africa strategy as it is currently articulated. Even if there are further government reductions, this is something that's achievable by using our resources that we have, moving them, for example, to those priority markets. I'll give you an example that on the African continent, our trade and investment relationships are predominantly with 8 to 10 countries on the continent. We know where there are places where we can focus our efforts. In terms of reporting on the results from that, we have the estimates process where we will always commit to report on the achievements of all of our activities, including whether those are diplomatic, whether they are trade, or international assistance. We also have an international assistance report, which reports on the details of how we are spending our international assistance dollars.
So is there an actual mechanism that reports on our return on investment for Canadian tax dollars, and how many Canadian jobs would be supported by that funding?
The Government of Canada and Global Affairs Canada will be reporting on all aspects of its economic cooperation and its trade opportunities. It's going to be developing a trade diversification strategy, and as part of that, our engagement and our economic cooperation on the African continent will be a part of how we report on what have been the results from the activities. So we are committed to reporting on results and how that impacts Canadians.
Thank you. Canada signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the African Union in 2024. What concrete deliverables, deadlines, and joint work plans flow from that MOU this year and next, and how will progress be reported transparently so that Parliament can hold the government to account on their commitments?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll begin answering this question and then I'll turn to my colleague, Drew Smith. The Memorandum of Understanding that we signed had several components. Some of them were about development, some of them were working together on peace and security, and some on economic cooperation. We have had engagement with the African Union since. We had, for example, our Sherpa for G20 and G7 who traveled to Addis and had meetings with the African Union. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we are scheduled to have another high-level dialogue in the fall of this coming year in 2026. There will be public reporting on that meeting and on the lead up and what the deliverables are. Drew, would you like to add?
I would just say that within the African Union, the Commission has transitioned in the last several months. So in February of this year, there was a new chair of the Commission. There were 8 new commissioners put in place. And it's those commissioners that are key to us establishing the priorities and work plan that is linked to the MOU. So in terms of process, we're in the process of establishing those relationships with the commissioners and setting the course for the action plan and concrete work that we'll do through the MOU. And I would just note that one of the key deliverables of the Agenda 2063, which is the central planning document for the African Union Commission, is the Continental Free Trade Agreement, and we continue to maintain engagement on that through a number of different development assistance investments.
Thank you. This strategy was pitched as a landmark approach. Specifically, what is new or different versus past strategies, and what previous measures did the department consider failures that will not be repeated?
Unfortunately, we're over time, so
6
that answer. No. Here. Oh, 6. Yes. Now you put 5. Oh, it's just.
The first round is 6 minutes. Thank you. I asked my question, so sorry, do you need me to repeat it or? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think that, the point of the strategy is to invoke a real change, and so it is meant to be a pivot. Predominantly, it's a pivot towards more economic cooperation and mutually beneficial partnerships between Canada and African countries. Canada has had a presence and a meaningful presence for many decades in Africa and is generally welcomed. We did 2 years of consultation in the development of the Africa strategy, and what we heard from African interlocutors and from others was that was positive, but it was also missing an opportunity to make those partnerships more multifaceted in order to make them more about trade and investment and to engage our private sector. So that's what we'll be doing differently, and we'll be having less of a focus on kind of one sector approach to those relationships.
Thank you.
Still have 10 seconds.
It's okay. No.
Once again, my apologies.
Very generous.
Thank you very much, MP Rood, and once again, my apologies for that mistake. Next, we go to MP Vandenbeld. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your briefing. I'd like to talk a bit about the work that we're doing on conflict prevention, on post-conflict reconstruction, and particularly women, peace, and security. We know right now there could be as many as 50 active conflicts on the continent, and Canada's commitment to women, peace, and security now has been longstanding. We're on our 3rd National Action Plan for WPS, and we know that when you have women at the table all the way through the process, we have a greater chance of sustainability of peace agreements. Could you talk a little bit about our ongoing commitment to women's peace and security and how this is integrating into some of our conflict prevention on the continent?
And then I'll turn to my colleagues who can provide more concrete examples. But I would say that peace and security, I've spoken a lot so far about economic cooperation and that being a pillar of the Africa strategy, but another very important pillar is peace and security, because if we're looking at mutually beneficial relationships and a strategy that benefits Canadians, it's not only about economic benefit, but it's also about security benefits, and that goes back to Canadians. And Canada does have a long-standing history in engaging on the African continent in peace and security. We have multiple programs: weapons threat reduction, counterterrorism, peace and security programming. We have partnerships on the ELSI initiative and the Vancouver Principles. Women, peace and security has been an area in which Canada has demonstrated leadership, and it goes to show that a focus on women can help us to achieve our aims in peace and security on the region. I can turn to one of my colleagues if you'd like to provide a concrete example of how we do that.
Sure. If I may, I'd be happy to offer an example from Ethiopia. And this is a place where there's been impressive Canadian leadership following the Pretoria Agreement in 2022. There was a deep need for disarmament and demobilization reintegration programming, DDR programming, and Canada led the creation of the Multi-Stakeholder Alliance, which is now the Multi-Stakeholder DDR Fund for Ethiopia. Canada has put in $14 million and is seeing impressive results, including 80,000 people that have been demobilized in this first phase. So that's a place you can point to Canadian leadership.
And I noted that you mentioned in your remarks the Equality Fund and Women's Voice and Leadership, which of course is providing funding directly to women and feminist organizations on the front line, small grants that really have dollar for dollar a lot more impact. And I know that Canada has also committed in our 10-year commitment for health and rights, or for health, to SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights. And, of course, all of that in accordance with the Maputo Protocol and nation states. And I wonder if you could give us an example of, give us an overview about where we are in terms of our support for SRHR, and also maybe some examples of where this has had impact.
Thanks. So I might take the same approach that I did last time, where I can provide a little bit of a general response to that and turn to some concrete examples. But I would say that programs like the Women Voice and Leadership Program are real examples of how Canada is creating transformational change by really leveraging local approaches and localization in how we do programming. And also that while we're looking to achieve economic growth and major changes, we know that investing in women is a very important way in which we can achieve those economic aims and security aims. As I mentioned, we have a long history in investing in health. It's something that forms a lot of our partnerships that we currently have in the continent. I'll turn to Sue.
Maybe I can, thank you for the question. Maybe I can speak to at least one example which supports our commitment to promoting sexual reproductive health and rights as well as economic development. It's a project that we have in Ghana called Generating Revenues for Improved Nutrition. And it's with the International Potato Center from PEI and CARE International. It's $10 million. And it improves the nutritional and financial security of women, youth, and young children in the districts of northern Ghana, which are particularly affected by insecurity. The project is training women and men in equitable nutrient availability and child feeding practices, promotes households to participate in farming as a business club, provides technical and logistical support to small and medium-scaled agro-processing, and focuses very much on women's role in nutrition and health, which allows them to be healthier when it comes to giving birth, which is a key component of their sexual reproductive health and rights.
And I noted that you talked about localization, and of course we know that for development, certainly international development projects, if you are involving women, and I know our feminist international assistance policy is predicated on the idea that rather than seeing women as just beneficiaries, we need to have them as part of the design and development of all projects, whether they benefit just specifically women or not, because those projects are more likely to be successful because they have that local input from women and girls. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the progress of our feminist international assistance policy.
Well, one thing I would say in general is that you mentioned is that we know that human rights is an important component of how Canada engages around the world, and that involves taking a human rights-based approach to undertaking international assistance, which means that those that we are helping to benefit are agents of change in their own beneficiation. And so there have been many results that we've achieved through our investments in these areas. I'll turn to my colleague, Sarah.
Thank you for the question. If I may, I'd like to offer an example from Mozambique, where the Women's Voice and Leadership Program, which is focused on building capacity of very small-scale women's organizations that wouldn't necessarily be able to access grant funding in a different way, but to offer more support so that they can be strong and stand where they are. In Mozambique, we work with a local partner, which has its challenges with the local language being Portuguese, but working heavily with that local organization to build capacity of hundreds of women's groups throughout the country, which became even more prominent as Mozambique came through the post-electoral violence and needed to have a strong civil society being part of the reconciliation and peace process. And the chair and the head of Aliada, she is sitting in that central peace process, and she credits the work that has been done with Canada to make sure that women's organizations are strong in her country, to make sure that she had the visibility to be invited to that table.
Thank you very much. Député Monsieur Simard, vous avez 6 minutes.
Member Simard, you have 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Usually I'm not here at this committee, so I'm going to ask you a question which might seem a little bit awkward. A week ago, I was in Sudbury, where I was visiting a nickel mine, and it was explained to me that the main competitor for Canadian nickel were in China and Africa. They're able to produce nickel at a lower cost. So at $14,000 a ton, a low cost. So in the strategy that you have, are there any developments to deal with this dumping problem if we want to have a good economic partnership? Do we have any programs, or do you have any programs or initiatives that are designed to well, there's the education aspect of the people, but is there any initiatives to improve their working conditions? Often with our North-South relationships, this is problematic.
Part of the strategy's implementation, there was the announcement of a trade and development program. And I think what you're touching on, there are, I think, some important issues that, in terms of dumping, there's very little that we can do within global affairs to have an impact on the market price of a mineral like nickel. But there is a lot we can do in terms of the way in which the minerals are produced. And that's something that we will certainly look at as we start to implement our trade and development program, looking at the enabling environment for the development of, in this case, we would be looking at mineral production, whether that's labor standards or that's other forms of human rights assurances as investments take place, either Canadian investments or other support to a local government. I would just say that Canada has a very strong reputation globally around questions about ESG standards, towards sustainable mining set of standards that have been established by the Canadian Mining Association are very well regarded globally, and we would see them being implemented through our work in Africa.
Merci. Je vous dis ça parce que...
Thank you. I've raised this because between the time where you implemented this strategy, and I do understand that a strategy is a living instrument, and the government intentions that were just announced. I don't know if you heard Mr. Carney speak about the budget. He said that we would be competing with China in the area of critical mineral mining. I don't know if, given this context, have you changed your approach, or are you putting emphasis on another area? Is there any type of feedback that you're getting with respect to a specific strategy? Is there a way to revisit the practices that you've implemented to deal with these constantly changing issues?
Implementation of a strategy, it would be absolutely important to make sure that it's remaining current with the challenges of today. And so even as I mentioned in my opening remarks, since its release in March of 2025, we've already seen a change in global conditions. And so absolutely, the implementation of the strategy is being done in real time. It's being done at headquarters, but also by each of our embassies and our heads of mission, who are looking at the ground, on the ground every day and considering what the current reality is and adjusting and selecting priorities and approaches. Did you?
Peut-être un élément que je peux ajouter.
One thing I'd like to add is that when we talk about Africa and China, we often talk about illegal extraction, which causes many problems for the actual miners. And that's where we get into this dumping, and that's where we have to focus our efforts. It's a question of human rights when this artisanal mining is causing problems. And more now, it's the African countries themselves want us to focus on this because this poses security problems for them, safety problems for them. If you have any further information to leave with the committee, it would be interesting. I don't have much time left. In your strategy, Africa is a cultural area that is very heterogeneous, particularly when it comes to languages. Do you have different approaches that you take with respect to Francophone and Anglophone Africa? You alluded to this in your opening statement. You talked about membership in the Association of Francophone Countries.
Then we have to move on.
Je dirais que tout
I'd say that all of our approaches to each and every country is tailored to meet the context of the country, whether it be Anglophone or Francophone. In Ethiopia, there are 3 languages, so yes, we do have the Organization of Francophone Countries that composes 27 countries, so we can use this forum to do our work.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Urban and your colleague. Thanks for appearing before committee. 1 in 5 workers at Foreign Affairs will lose their jobs. Some could be before December this year. How is that going to affect the Africa strategy and the Africa's mission in general?
So the government, Global Affairs Canada is one among almost all federal ministries that is going to be undertaking that reduction exercise, understood within a context of Canadian economic conditions currently. When we are looking at undertaking those reductions, it's certainly an exercise that we're doing with regard to making sure that the resources that remain are aligned with what our priorities are. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, in order to deliver on the Africa strategy, it's quite simply a question of understanding where are the priorities for us in order to deliver. Where does that mean that we need to keep our resources or move our resources and to operate within that framework?
Speaking of which is, you mentioned the priorities. I'm keen on priorities.
Yeah.
What are the priorities after we did the Africa strategy in the last parliament, which is, I believe, that there was a lot of recommendations to focus rather than go all over the map in Africa. So you must have taken this study into consideration, or this report into consideration. And we know that in March, I believe, the Africa strategy was released, which is March this year. Where are the priorities and where's the focus? So between the job cuts and being effective on such an important and strategic market and plan for us, how are you going to balance that, and where going to be the focus? And I'm really curious to know.
What I would say is that, the government of Canada has been very clear about what its focus is with the 7 missions that have come out from the Prime Minister. We, within the Ministry of Global Affairs Canada, understand what that means for us in terms of our international engagement. We know that we need to be working towards enhancing Canadian economic and security interests, advancing Canadian sovereignty, and we have a clear mandate that we need to focus on trade diversification. We know that our engagement in Africa is a part of that priority. While the government today is focusing on markets in Indo-Pacific and in Europe, this is where we have Canadian engagement at present. We also know that operating in Africa is a part of that prioritization, and that we have a role to play in focusing on economic cooperation through various means in which we engage.
Sorry to cut you off. Being the Assistant Deputy Minister on Africa branch, would you be able to share with us a specific project or projects that the government is working on in order to make the success of the Africa strategy something that Canadian can hear some good news about? If there's anything right now that you can name, I think will be very beneficial. And I know that the government is working, but you are part of the government and you have an important job, and we would like to see, to hear some news from you on that.
Sure. I mean, so I've already talked to you about some of the initiatives that we've undertaken. I think maybe what you're getting at is that what this government needs right now is deals. And what it needs is concrete opportunities, including for the Canadian private sector, so that it can truly advance its economic agenda.
Is there a specific project or specific country that you think we can name? Like today or this week, the Prime Minister is in Abu Dhabi. We know that this can be good news hopefully, for the AI industry.
Yeah.
What is going to be in Africa, where and how, and where's the focus? I think that would be very important to know, rather than, the overall generic news about where we're going.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to provide you with an example. It's not only one country. There are a few countries that come to the top when we're looking at potential for having real deals. However, I would say, as an example, we've been working quite a bit with South Africa in the context of our G20 and our G7 presidencies. We've had numerous meetings at the leader level and at the foreign minister level. Our Prime Minister is traveling to Johannesburg. He's going to be attending the G20. Very likely that there will be bilateral meetings held at the leader level there. Canada and South Africa have been working together on developing an ambitious economic agenda to advance both of our
Sorry,
economies.
is it in AI? Is it in mining? Is it in oil and gas? Is it in education? Can you name something?
Okay, so I don't want to get ahead of any kind of news release that comes out after the G20 meeting. What I can say is that they are working on concrete elements of that agenda, but I can say specifically that if you look at the link between the G20 presidency and the G7, there are joint priorities that are in the area of AI, they're in the area of critical minerals, they're in the area of wildfire, and so there are joint areas, in including a joint interest in investment and in increasing investment between the
No,
countries.
you're over the time, sir, unfortunately.
Thanks again.
Next, we have MP Rob Oliphant. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming in. Thank you for the work you did. First, I have several thank yous. One is to thank you for taking seriously the work of this committee in the development of the strategy. There were two tandem processes going on, one here around this table where we heard from witnesses, and the process that was happening in Global Affairs with approximately 600 representations, consultations, written submissions, which is a lot. So thank you for taking parliamentarians seriously. I want to I could follow up on Mr. Abdeltaif's questions as well. I would cite first as the most significant change is the development of a trade hub. And while we don't get deals done, it's been 6 months or 7 months. We've had an election in the middle of this. We've had many things go on in summer. But the trade hub is up and running. And I can give you a few minutes on that. But I think that what I am hearing in the community, both from Africans and Canadians, is they now have a place to go. They now have a sense that there is one-stop shopping, and you're able to bring together a bunch of different players, and I don't like the word, but the nexus of bringing all those things together. So I think that is one thing. In terms of deals, those come, and they can come in agri-food, they can come in mining, they can come in construction and infrastructure, and a variety of things that Canada has expertise in. But I want to push a little bit on diaspora. You mentioned them in your remarks, but one of the things that I have to say that we identified was the strength that Canada has, the comparative advantage that we have compared to other countries. And in the kind of struggle and the so-called scramble for Africa is the Canadian diaspora communities. From every part of Africa, we have citizens, we have business people, academics, organizations, institutions, les francophones, anglophone, lusophone, others who are in universities or in business associations, trade groups. One of the imaginings was that we would find a home for that. So we have a trade hub, but we also talk about finding a way to not have random or ad hoc conversations with diaspora African Canadians who showed up, but actually try to make a system of it where Canadians who have African roots have a place to go, like the Trade Hub, to say, these are our ideas, these are our connections, we have language capacity, cultural capacity, experience, and all the things. Can you talk a little bit about how we're going to do that?
Start and I'll turn to you. Thank you very much for the question. The Trade Hub has been actually quite game-changing in terms of Global Affairs Canada and our ability to engage on trade issues. The team is busy prioritizing markets, taking into consideration Canadian strengths and Canadian sectors that can be engaged in engaging with interlocutors. On diaspora, we had committed to develop a diaspora engagement mechanism. What I will do is I'll turn to my colleague Drew Smith, who can talk to you a little bit more about some of the activities of our trade hub and how we've been able to leverage that and what we can look forward to in terms of more systemically engaging with diaspora, because in the lead up to the strategy, we really learned how valuable it was to have an ongoing dialogue with diaspora communities.
Sure, thank you. I would just note that before moving to the trade hub, the diaspora relationship, I think, is very much multifaceted, and noting the recommendation from this committee that informal engagement as well as more formal, kind of structured, ongoing strategy implementation engagement with the diaspora was important. I think that's central to how we're looking at the relationship with the diaspora. So we're seeing that diaspora relationship play out in many, many areas of the work that we're doing to implement the strategy. So just on the trade hub, I would say that, as Cheryl just mentioned, the importance of market prioritization is very important. I mean, it's come up in other questions today. How we take the strategy and we move from Africa to countries and important countries and regions, whether we're talking about trade and investment or we're talking about peace and security. And so that's central to the work that we're doing right now, is trying to establish where those priority markets are and how we want to engage. I would also say that the budget has provided, I think, expanded tools for us to engage through the Trade Hub on supporting Canadian enterprises looking to get into the African market. And this, I think, is where the diaspora is very important, where we can work in Canada with the Canadian diaspora community that is engaged in commercial relationships with Africa, or looking to expand and export in Africa.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Simard, vous avez deux...
Mr. Simard, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In order to strengthen your diplomatic engagements or interpersonal relations, the university field is a very good exchange vector, scientific networker. At the University of Quebec in Chicoutimi, I had quite a few colleagues who had relationships with African universities. Do you, with your strategy, support these initiatives, which are in fact a win-win situation for all universities? You could comment on that, and perhaps I'll turn to my other colleagues. Yes, universities are very important for our trade and for relationships between countries. Perhaps would you like to add anything? Indeed, the University of Quebec in Chicoutimi did have a project with our department in Africa, and there are several examples of projects that have been carried out. These projects, we have our priorities for every country where we intervene, and we try to match our initiatives. And so it might look like there's no organization, or it might be chaotic, but in actual fact, it's quite focused. Another part of our mandate is to have relationships with universities and colleges which work to ensure that their international programs match with the departmental priorities. I don't know if you saw the report on Enquête a couple of months ago on African smugglers who were falsifying academic credentials. It seems to be occurring in Africa. We know that there's a large diaspora of Francophone Africa in Quebec, Do you do any work to ensure that good information in your strategy? We've seen this. Well, we've seen a lot of students who were coming to Canada on the invitation of universities. Can you do any work to ensure that the proper information is forwarded? Other departments are involved in that. I can only talk about what we do. Yes, there is a problem. We're a victim of our own success, if you like. There's information that's available in university fairs and in our missions located abroad that help out.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. In 2018, I visited Senegal, Benin, and Nigeria with Minister Bibo. And I know in Benin that both the Chinese and U.S. government, they have such a big presence, and I'm glad to hear that we have now an office or embassy there. In Nigeria, I was told by our diplomatic mission that we need to pay more attention to Nigeria, and maybe a visit by a minister will do worthwhile because there's so much going on there. Same thing I hear about Algeria as also a growing economy, and there's so much in common as far as agriculture and oil and gas. Can you share with us what's the focus of our missions in Nigeria and Algeria? And I would really appreciate if you can nail some projects.
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, Nigeria and Algeria are very important countries for us in terms of trade and investment. I'll turn it over to our Director General to speak more about the specifics.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll just take them separately. They're two of the largest economies on the continent. Algeria is our largest export market on the continent. It is the bulk of our exports are in cereals. And stay tuned if you want to listen to deals that are happening. I think that's going to be a very productive space, cereals to Algeria. So agricultural products to Algeria, I think is a space that you should continue to watch. I think we're going to be quite successful there. Our priorities in Algeria, the priorities across the continent are now trade diversification, making sure that our relationships with those countries are solid, and where we have common interests, that we move those common interests ahead. So I think in the case of Algeria, absolutely the trade diversification point is top of the list. I would say in Nigeria, it's twofold. Security is an important part of their reality and therefore of our relationship with them. In the past, Nigeria has been a big supplier of peacekeeping troops, so we've had some interaction with them there as well. Now they're struggling with their own internal security in a much bigger way. Nigeria is the second largest economy on the continent after South Africa. It is a complex business environment. So where we're focusing is trying to help our companies find their way through the Nigerian market. There are lots of opportunities. There are lots of opportunities for two-way trade. There are lots of people from Nigeria who are very interested in many things that Canada has to offer.
Thank you. I'll remain time to Ms. Routine, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Foreign interference is a well-documented and discussed problem in Canada. And we all know that China is pursuing an aggressive stance in Africa through their Belt and Road strategy. How will you screen out adversarial influence and hostile state proxies in procurement, research partnerships, and digital systems tied to projects funded under this strategy? And what audits will be made available so Canadians can see exactly where our money goes?
Okay, so we'll just start by saying that indeed foreign interference is a very significant issue. It's a growing issue around the world. It's something that we pay very close attention to and monitor through our embassies and through our reporting. And we know that there are a number of international players on the continent who engage in practices, including in foreign interference. And so this is something that is important for us in terms of our engagement. In terms of how we operate and how we spend funds, we have many checks and balances. We work with trusted partners when we're spending international assistance resources abroad and on the African continent. We work with trusted partners and undertake fiduciary evaluations of those partners before we before we fund them. In many cases, we're funding organizations. We're not providing funds directly to governments. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Sue.
I think the question of how we manage risk in our development programming, which is where the bulk of the funding from the Canadian government comes from, is a really, really pertinent one, and we revise our processes regularly. So there's what our Assistant Deputy Minister has spoken about the au préalable risk assessments that we do and risk mitigation structures that we put in place. But we also do regular audits. And we do monitoring missions. That's partly why we have people in the field. And where we need specific expertise, we hire it to go and do field missions as best we can.
So is there any requirements for transparency of how the funds are being used, or what organizations, like when you give money to an organization, how that organization is using Canadian taxpayer monies or how it's funded?
Yes, there's regular financial reporting. Depending on the level of risk, if it's a higher risk, we increase the level of reporting, which means that all of the money, we get regular financial reporting on how all of the money is spent very specifically.
Thank you very much. Next, we go to MP Mona Fortier. You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing so we can discuss this important strategy. I was going to ask the same question as my colleague had, so it's important to know how this strategy is going to be implemented. We talked about the diaspora and the 3 million Canadians who are part of the Afro-Canadian diaspora. We talked about the trade hub, but the Prime Minister announced on September 5th new measures to protect and strengthen and transform strategic Canadian industries and to deal with the situation occurring in the U.S. We talk about $5 billion to help Canadian businesses, sectors that are affected by the tariffs, to diversify. There was assistance to canola producers for an agri-marketing program. I'm trying to see, and then bilingualism. That is another very important aspect. It's a natural advantage that we do have for trading with Africa. How will these measures tie into the Canada-Africa strategy so that we can ensure that the Afro-Canadian diaspora participates more?
Kind of accounting of how the government is addressing issues related to the tariffs. But, I think that as far as the diaspora is concerned, we've been paying quite close attention to what opportunities exist in Africa, and then considering which kinds of partners in Canada are best to work with in terms of finding opportunities for them to work in Africa. And I would say that Black-owned enterprises are a very interesting group, subset of Canadian enterprises that have a very strong relationship with Africa, and that experience, I think, can be shared more effectively with other Black-owned enterprises and more broadly other Canadian enterprises that are interested in working in Africa. So we're looking at ways that we can engage these enterprises in ways that can support their efforts, their aspirations to export to Africa.
Parce que pour juste donner quelques exemples, j'étais récemment.
Just to give you a few examples, I was in Montreal and I met with the House of the Chamber of Commerce Benin Canada. What can we do to help with this diversification that Canada wants to do in getting into other markets in Africa and in Benin? So there are challenges that we have with respect to the tariffs, and we have this issue, where do we send people? Do we send them to the trade commissioners or to the trade hubs? These are questions that are being asked. We say we have an Africa strategy, but how do we make it come alive? So I gave you this recent example that I had when I was at my visit to Montreal. Thank you for your question. It's interesting that it has to do with Benin. I haven't yet met with the representative, but indeed our commercial reps here in Canada are in the trade hub. So we're not talking about two different things here. And I would advise them to meet with our trade representatives in Benin. It's very pragmatic. And the other aspect, when I was at the Impact Forum, it's an event that is huge. That took place in Ottawa very recently. Mauritius, the ambassador from Mauritius, said that he was coming back to Ottawa because he wanted to do business with Canada, and he could see that there was more openness now, and that there was a desire to work with us. So, does the strategy offer other possibilities to countries that want to come and do business, such as Mauritius?
The question that you received in Montreal, the strategy, I think, is part of a broader effort, of course, within the government of Canada, and even certainly within the department. And so the Canada Export Program is something that I think is worth noting and perhaps sharing with constituents.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
MP Holman, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that are attending the Foreign Affairs Committee today. I'd like to ask questions regarding the geostrategical situation and also potential foreign interference in Africa. First question is, what efforts are Canada and our allies taking to counter the increased presence of both Russia and China on the continent?
Okay. So indeed, I've spoken. I'll begin, and my colleagues can provide a little more specificity. But indeed, we are very much aware that countries like Russia and China are very much have a large presence on the continent. In fact, they're increasing the number of embassies that they have and their presence. The trade volumes are generally getting bigger, and there's involvement with mineral extraction, arms supplies, etc. So this is something that the Government of Canada is well aware of. It's also why we maintain a diplomatic presence in a number of countries, and the countries that we do, including in West Africa, including in countries like Mali. Because by maintaining relationships with our government counterparts, we are providing a counterbalance and a Canadian influence, and it allows us to be able to keep in touch with issues that are involved on the continent. Did you want to add, Sue?
Given that I cover the West African region, it's obviously an issue that is top of mind very, very often. I think we need to be realistic about what is possible. We will do our best by staying engaged. We're often questioned, why do you continue to speak with interlocutors with whom we don't agree? And it is very much for that reason. At some point, we're going to find some common issue that we can agree on, and we can move forward together and try and build a relationship that shows opportunities and different ways of doing things that are more aligned with the way that we would like to see things happening. Right now in that region, it is very difficult. The presence of Russia is deep. The presence of China is deep, and I would say very long-standing. And that is one of the things that we pay close attention to, is sometimes we don't get the result today. Sometimes we don't get it tomorrow. But if we continue to work at it now, we will get it in a slightly more medium-term perspective.
Thank you. I just want to go back to a previous question. Specifically, what steps is Canada taking to counter China's Belt and Road initiative, and does the department have concerns about Beijing's expansion of soft power through this program?
So there are a number of ways, and I would actually point to Canada's G7 presidency this year, in which Canada is mobilizing its G7 partners in order to for example, the G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan. I think this is a recognition that there are countries that are the G7 countries and other aligned countries who have a focus on undertaking, for example, critical mineral extraction in a sustainable way and adhering to international standards, and that this is an approach that we feel collectively we can make inroads in. And so therefore, we are very much focusing on collaborating with like-minded partners. The other is an initiative called the PGII, which is where G7 members are collectively investing in infrastructure around the world, but including on the African continent. And the idea there is for a value proposition and in order to make sure that there's an alternative and a counterweight. And it's also, as part of the Africa strategy, as I mentioned, when we're looking at our own Canadian trade diversification and we're looking at prioritizing markets, some of what we're looking at is identifying where there are African partners where we can partner to build supply chains that are of interest to Canada and critical minerals that may be of interest to Canada and our allies.
Thank you. How's the recent suspension of France's counterterrorism efforts in Mali affected Canada's Africa strategy?
Mali is the gift that keeps on giving. I don't know that at this point I can answer that question directly. The changes in the American presence in West Africa for the whole region is taking some adjustment for everyone, for the governments of that region in particular, and for everyone who is engaged there. The French have a particular relationship with the countries in that region, and we are all adjusting to the stance that those countries have taken. It is not the forward progress that we would hope, but like I said earlier, we stay engaged to see what it is and where there are opportunities. If we don't stay engaged, then we won't be able to find the opportunities. So we're there. We have a small-ish presence in Mali, and we have a small presence in Burkina Faso. But for now, they're there under very difficult circumstances, but they keep those doors of communication open to see where it is that we can have some kind of positive impact.
Maybe I'll just add, because it's a reference to the Africa strategy. Okay, just very quickly, which is that our objectives in the Africa strategy are just not only with Mali, and so we also have strong partnerships, and part of our approach is to build partnerships with countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Benin, who are strong democracies who we can partner with to fight against the spread of terrorism and instability in the region. And we also have a special envoy for the Sahel who cooperates internationally, and so our efforts, I think, are worthwhile and they're broader, and there are challenges specifically in the country in operating, but it's part of a bigger picture, and I think that is actually as important as ever right now to be engaging in.
Thank you very much. We next have MP Bill Blair. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses, not just for your appearance today, which has been very informative and very helpful to this committee, but also for your important work on the Africa strategy. I think you've positioned the country well for the next steps. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those next steps. As has already been acknowledged by my colleagues, there are some challenges. I think China has well established itself in Africa through its Belt and Road investments. They overwhelmingly dominate not just the extraction of critical minerals and copper in Central Africa and critical minerals through Zimbabwe and Mali, but they also are dominating the processing of those minerals. And so our supply chains, quite frankly, are somewhat in jeopardy. I note that, frankly, money is, notwithstanding our good relationships, money is very important in these investments. And the United States in 2019 established their International Development Financial Corporation. And they put about $8 billion a year into African development, which I think could be advantageous for us. My question is going to pertain to sort of what are the next steps in the Africa strategy? How do we position Canada? And in particular, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the development and negotiating multilateral agreements with African countries which are rich in critical minerals, and to secure those sustainable supply chains, And you, Ms. Stefan, referenced the possibility of establishing formal partnership frameworks with African nations to coordinate investment, technology transfer, and those environmental standards. We understand that environment can be challenging, but at the same time, I think the obvious next steps in our strategy is to establish bilateral, multilateral agreements, either with a specific nation or a group of nations that we can work with in this area.
Thank you very much for the question, and that is a very real challenge when it comes to critical minerals and the processing of critical minerals that we are well aware of. And when you look at the engagement of the United States, one thing that is often spoken about is the dismantling of USAID and the departure from an international development perspective. But that also coincides with the United States going in more heavily on the economic side and having an emerging policy of trade, not aid, in terms of how they undertake their diplomacy. And in fact, I believe that they are now replacing China as the primary investor on the continent. And there are opportunities for Canada, including, we know there's a lot of focus right now in the Libido corridor in southern Africa, and there are opportunities for Canada to engage with other parties, including African, for example. As I mentioned, we've had lots of discussions with South Africa in our G7 and G20 presidencies and looking at opportunities for collaboration, but even with the United States and looking at where are there opportunities for Canada in this space. And I'll turn to Drew to elaborate.
Yeah, I would say that as far as multilateral engagement, certainly we can work through the African Union. There are well-established kind of standards and approaches to mining generally, but critical minerals as well. So, I mean, that's an important focus for us. In terms of bilateral relationships, I think the question is, how can we as a government, the public sector, engage in what is effectively private sector operations? So the question of can we ensure that that minerals and the supply chains that we need to supply those minerals are consistent with our standards. I think that's very important. If we look at the G7 action plan on critical minerals, standards is central to that piece. And as I was mentioning earlier, Canada's brand in Africa is very much geared towards meeting those ESG standards that the G7 and other like-minded countries have established and feel are important in our business operations in Africa. So I think that's an important way of kind of contrasting where Canada stands as far as mineral extraction and production. And I guess the other question is beneficiation, and how do we partner with local with governments in Africa around the question of how can we ensure that there is local benefit coming from the extraction of these minerals?
I believe that this committee certainly would be strongly supportive of our continuing efforts in both development aid and in diplomacy in that region. But I think we also have to reflect on the practicalities of advancing Canada's economic interests in the region as well. I think we have a great deal to offer. But, governance issues and even corruption in some of these countries makes the adherence to those standards in the mining operations very, very difficult to ensure compliance.
Very brief answer. We're out of time.
If you have anything to respond, please.
Quickly say that as part of our thinking around the trade and development program, the issues you're raising around corruption and other limitations, things that create excessive risk within markets for Canadian companies. That's something we're trying to address alongside the work that Trade Commissioner is doing in these markets.
Thank you very much. We next have MP Simard. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. Just on the same line, just for my personal information, you talked about an initiative, BGII. Can you explain what that is?
Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment. Et ça, c'était commencé par le gouvernement d'Angleterre pendant leur
It started
présidence.
off with the British government when they had the presidency. So they want to have floor prices for critical minerals. Is it part and parcel of that? No, it's different.
Well, I would just say that the PGII is very much connected with critical minerals. It's about the transport corridor. Well, it looks at transport corridors generally, but the Libido corridor is the one that we are most focused on.
Ah, merci. Rapidement,
Thank
je suis un
you.
député.
I represent the Bloc, so I have to talk about the Jaron Lajoie doctrine. I know there's a lot of cooperation between Quebec and Africa, particularly with respect to Senegal. And not so long ago, the Gaspé CEGEP received $5,000 for an agriculture program. My question is simple. Is there a place? Do you respect this type of initiative that is undertaken by Quebec or other provinces? Is that parcel of this initiative? We work together, even at the missions. Thank you for your question. Indeed, we do have a very strong relationship and collaborative relationship with the government of Quebec, and we work together. And sometimes the Quebec office does something that the embassy cannot do, and the reverse is also holds true. Also, in the university field, but also in Quebec organizations, there's an affinity with Africa with respect to entrepreneurship initiatives, and this goes back quite some time. There's an acronym. Don't ask me to repeat what it is, but there is very close ties, and we're building on these ties to have effective projects.
Rude, you have 5 minutes.
Canadians have a strong and proud history engaging with developing African nations through projects like the Muskoka Initiative under the last Conservative government. And I've been lucky enough to be on the ground in Tanzania, for instance, and have seen firsthand the success stories and felt the gratitude of the residents, the women who have used the clinics for maternal and child care and the birthing centers. And the strategy does not mention, this particular strategy we're talking about today, does not mention maternal, newborn, and child health care. Just curious why the strategy does not include continuing the Canadian legacy of maternal care.
Thank you very much for the question. And indeed, Canada has a very proud history of investing in maternal and newborn child health. And in fact, we've been doing that continuously since and even before the Muskoka Initiative. It forms the backbone. And so the approach with the Africa strategy will always be to build on past Canadian investments and on the legacy of the good things that we've done. And that includes the leadership that we've shown in gender equality, and it's our investment in women and girls and in women's health. It's actually, and Tanzania is a very good country to use as an example. I don't know, perhaps I could turn to Sarah, but what I would say about our investments in health in Tanzania is that those are particularly sustainable, and that we've been able to help strengthen health systems in Tanzania through investments, and that's having a great benefit for women. Africa, I think it's well known, has terrible rates of maternal mortality, and so there is a very big need for that.
Absolutely, and I'm so pleased that you've had a chance to see that work in action, because it's some of the best work that happens on the continent with really strong Canadian partners as well. And if I could just add to what our Assistant Deputy Minister said, is that those investments in health are such a strong platform to stand on for dialogue with the government and in other spaces. And so the team at the High Commission and the High Commissioner, they are very committed to engaging in that space and building on that strong legacy.
So I'm just curious, though, why was it not included in the strategy specifically? Because the strategy does not mention it. Is that just an oversight then in the strategy, or?
No, it's not an oversight, because the strategy indeed is about, it's about a pivot. So indeed what we're doing with the strategy is that we are moving towards using international assistance to do more economic growth activities and trade and development in those are spaces that we did not do trade. We did not use a lot of our international assistance for previously. It does not mean that we're holus bolus leaving priorities or sectors that we've already invested in before. There's a variety of areas in which we invest, and in fact, the strategy itself does mention some of the history and the good practices that we've already undertaken. So it is not the intention of the strategy to completely leave behind all past investments or priorities.
Thank you very much for that answer. Now, the strategy promises clear results. So just curious if there will be a public country-by-country maternal newborn child health scorecard on maternal deaths, newborn deaths, vaccinations, and will it be updated each year? Is that something?
We can take note of the interest in having additional information in those areas. We certainly do work with partners in order to track development outcomes in the countries in which we're undertaking development assistance, and we do report on the results of, even at the project level, of what we're investing in. And as I mentioned, we do have documents that we contribute to the estimates documents and our report on Canadian international assistance that come out annually, where we try to provide granular level examples of the results of our development investments. I don't know if my colleagues have anything to add.
So on that then, are you able to tell us then how much Africa strategy funding is explicitly earmarked for maternal, newborn, and child health by, like, for the next 5 years compared to Muskoka levels, and how will you protect those dollars from being reallocated?
I can, subsequent to this meeting, we can provide you with detailed information about past investments and the sectors in which those have been directed. But I cannot speak about where funds will go to in the following, in the coming 5 years, because this is at the discretion of the department, and it's a process to determine where we're going to put our international assistance investments. So that's an ongoing discussion.
Okay, thank you. 30 seconds. Yeah, I guess the only last question I would have quickly is, could you let us know what the top African MNCH partner countries are, and what are their targets for maternal and neonatal mortality reductions or skilled birth attendance, and is that something?
Sorry, I can speak louder and offer that to the group. I can speak to the top four, which are Tanzania, Mozambique, Ghana, and Ethiopia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, we go to MP Rob Oliphant. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Chair. And thanks again. 2 words I don't like are nexus and pivot. And I used nexus in my last question. I'm going to use pivot in this question. I want to get into the pivot a little bit more that you mentioned, because there is something that is we're not communicating well enough, maybe to the opposition and maybe to Canadians, about the massive change that this means, where we're moving from a 20th century model of charity and helping to a 21st century model of mutual prosperity, mutual security, and engagement as one-on-one, eye-to-eye, equal relationship, which is quite different for us, which doesn't necessarily mean fewer resources, but it does mean pivoting the resources to things which will create a mobile middle class, which will then become a venue for us to sell products to, and opportunities for trade this way. I just want to poke a little bit on that one first. Heads up on the second question is, in the 6th pillar of the report, we talk about the engagement of African countries on the world stage and opening up multilateral fora for an appropriate, proportional representation of African voices at the UN organs and multilateral fora. How are we going to do that? So the first one is a little bit more on the pivot, and then a little bit more on the the engagement of African countries in their rightful position on the world stage.
Okay, thank you very much. So in answering that question, maybe I think it's beneficial to talk about a little bit of the context within we're working. Indeed, the pivot that we're talking about is a pivot towards greater economic cooperation in our development relationships on the African continent. We know even when we were consulting for the Africa strategy that was what our interlocutors in Africa wanted, is that they wanted greater economic cooperation. But we also know that globally, if you look at ODA levels, they are expected in 2025 to drop by 17%. So ODA levels in general in the world are decreasing. But this has started a conversation. It started a global conversation about how do we do international assistance and how can it be the most effective. And they're looking at different models. definitely peer-to-peer mutually beneficial models are a way in which we can look at undertaking development. That involves also bringing in the private sector, looking at innovative ways in which we undertake international development, for example, looking to impact investing and blended finance as ways in which we can undertake a development from this point forward. And we can invest in things, for example, continue to invest in health, but we can also do so in a way that we feel is what the world is coming to, is making sure that the investments in development are sustainable, that we are investing in institutions so that they have the capacity to undertake over a long term and make the development benefits more sustainable over the long term themselves. And also, I would say that the focus on trade and investment is something that African partners are looking for, and the feeling that that is ways in which they themselves can have control over their own development outcomes themselves. On the world stage, indeed, I had mentioned in my opening remarks that Canada was a champion for the African Union to be a part of the G20, and we are pleased to see that that has taken place, and also see the benefit and appreciate that African voices are, whether Canada is assisting or not assisting, they are having a greater voice in multilateral organizations. And in fact, the whole landscape of multilateral institutions globally is evolving and changing, and the Global South is demanding to have a greater voice. One of the things in which we do is that we provide instruction to our executive directors at international financial institutions, at the World Bank, at the development banks. And we are talking to them about the reform of multilateral institutions and international financial institutions and development banks so that they can...
How has the strategy been received by African partners, particularly governments, state-to-state relations?
We have had, since the release of the strategy, I think that I would say in general, what has been expressed to us is an appreciation that the Government of Canada has recognized that diplomatic relations with Africa is important, and they are appreciative that there's a strategy that lays out a framework so that we can get to business. I would say, additionally, they are impatient to get going. They are very enthusiastic, and at missions and at headquarters, we are engaged with partners who want to really see the implementation.
Thank you very much. Right on time. We have MP Michael Chong next for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about something that you'd mentioned in your opening remarks. As you reiterated in your opening remarks, the government has done a pivot on its foreign policy. The Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs have indicated that the government's #1 foreign policy priority is defense and security, but the second priority is economic resilience, part of which is diversifying trade and ensuring that Canada is a reliable trading partner, something that you referenced in your opening remarks. Building on that second pillar, the Prime Minister said about 3 weeks ago that the government is working to expedite the export of Canadian energy, particularly oil and gas. He indicated that Canada is an energy superpower, an unabashed energy superpower. He said we have the 3rd largest reserves of oil. We have the 4th largest reserves of LNG. And he also added we've just started our first LNG shipments. Africa, as you know, is a continent of 1.3 billion people. They use as much oil as we do on any given day, about 4 million barrels of oil a day, a bit more than we do, but we're a country of 40 million people. They desperately need energy, oil and gas to expand. So my question is there now a whole of government focus, particularly within the Department of Foreign Affairs, to build on the Prime Minister's commitment to expedite Canadian exports of oil and gas to the African continent, where they are in need of energy, and what is being done through the whole of government, particularly Foreign Affairs, to do that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think one of the issues in Africa is that the use of energy is not very efficient. So electrification in Africa remains a major problem. 300 million Africans remain without electricity. So energy poverty is a serious problem. Now that is not necessarily due to a lack of fossil fuels, for example. a country like Nigeria has tens of millions of people who don't have access to electricity, and yet probably, I don't know for sure, but perhaps the single largest export from Nigeria is oil. So where Canada, I think, can be helpful in this regard, in terms of expanding Canadian exports in the energy sector, is through our technology, and we see that in Nigeria, we see that in Tanzania, and other markets where Canadian energy technology can be applied, where that can.
But I would just interject by saying that the fastest way to ramp up electricity production in a way that's lower carbon than conventional coal is through natural gas. And Canada has 30 trillion cubic meters of natural gas reserves. Nigeria has maybe 6 billion cubic meters. Like, we have more natural gas than the entire African continent. And that's a surefire way to increase electricity output. That's why when Ontario closed its coal-fired plant in Nanticoke, it replaced a lot of that coal-fired generation with natural gas plants throughout the province of Ontario that filled in the gap. So we have an opportunity here to ensure that Africa doesn't become reliant on coal, like China has become, in increasing electricity output, contributing massively to global emissions, because gas has about half the greenhouse gas output per kilowatt hour produced of coal. So, I think it's something that needs to be incorporated into the government's approach to Africa. Like I said, Africa is short on energy. Canada has the third and fourth largest reserves of oil and gas in the world, and I think it needs to be part of what the government is doing in Africa.
And I would just add that, obviously, Global Affairs Canada has been tasked, and Export Development Canada have been tasked with delivering on the government's agenda to diversify trade, and Africa will be a part of that trade diversification strategy as it rolls out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Next to MP Anita van der Velde, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you very much. I want to pick up on something that you said, Mr. Smith, about the brand of Canada, particularly when it comes to things like resource development. Because when I was in the DRC and speaking to officials there, there was a really strong sense that they wanted more Canada. And the reason that they said they wanted more Canada, particularly, as I said, on resource development, is because Canada does bring those values. Canada does ensure that we're looking after the local communities. We're not creating conflict in local regions because of the conflict for those minerals. Environmental standards. We bring something that others are not, and that is an advantage for Canada. I also note that with global trade generally, Canada has been bringing a kind of a trade that is more people to people, trade that will not just benefit corporations and elites, but also that it will involve the population, and it will benefit the people of a country, which I think is vitally important today when we're seeing more and more turning against globalization. We're seeing isolationism, and in order to counter that, I believe that we almost have to do for global trade what the welfare state did for capitalism, and make sure that this is something that is actually benefiting people. And so I was wondering if you could further elaborate a little bit about how Canada is perceived, particularly in these areas, but also the kind of work we're doing with FinDev, with the African Development Bank, where we are leveraging private capital, but in a way that is actually going to have broad benefits for communities, for local populations, and ensure that those, there's many comments about countries in Africa where you have, rich countries, poor people, and where we can actually play a role through trade to be able to ameliorate that.
Maybe I'll just start and then I'll turn it over to Drew. But just to say, I think that this gets at the heart of mutually beneficial relationships, right? Because I think that Canada can engage in a way that is beneficial for its own economy and its own security, but it can do so in a way that benefits the countries in which we're partnering with. I think that Certainly, our values and our standards are something that make us an attractive partner for African governments and for African institutions. And when we were developing the Africa strategy, we were doing so not only thinking about the opportunities in Africa, but thinking reflectively about what Canada has to offer. And therefore, we took into consideration the advantages that we have, that we're considered to be a partner of choice for those very reasons. But also we know that there are certain sectors that African partners are looking for from Canada. So, for example, we get asked about agriculture. We have those education partnerships. ICT is an area. So we want to be focusing on sectors that are Canadian strengths where we are asked to partner with them. And our linguistic ties, which has been brought up as well at this meeting, which provides us with an advantage when we're doing business, because there are a number of countries who want to do business with a French-speaking country. And so we need to do, what we want to do with the Africa strategy is to better leverage those aspects that are a Canadian advantage and make sure that we maximize those. I don't know if Drew wanted to add anything.
Sure, I can maybe just touch just briefly on this question of how a concrete example of what we're looking at when we talk about broadening the benefit, this mutual benefit. I think one of I quite like the work that we do with the African Guarantee Fund. There's a project we have with the African Development Bank. It's called IFAWA, and what it does is it provides guarantees to African financial institutions, which encourages them to lend to and provide financial services to women. And the amazing thing, of course, is that women are great clients, but oftentimes are seen as too risky. So these guarantees provide the incentive for these financial institutions to lend to women. And what we're seeing is, in fact, that those guarantees are rarely have to be used because the women are actually a much better bet than are expected.
Very much, and youth as well. I know that we've worked with the African Development Bank for young people who don't have credit, who don't have experience. So it's, I think, for those populations, you see a greater return. I appreciate that. I also, of course, it's in Canada's interest, especially when we are trading, to be trading with democratic countries, with countries that have good governance, that are accountable back to their citizens, pluralistic countries. So I wonder, we've talked a little bit and touched on governance, but I know that Canada is doing a lot of capacity building when it comes to good governance. It's far better when a country that is accountable back to their people and provides the necessary services of, the health and education through their own systems, that is far, far more sustainable than continuing to provide external aid. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about democracy and governance.
Unfortunately, that'll have to wait for another time. We're 40 seconds over. Thank you very much. We go next to MP Simard, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the issue of energy, a question raised by MP Chung. You talked about a pivot, that we're going to go from having paternalistic relationships to one of equal to equal. It reminds me of the language we use when we talk to our Indigenous partners. We talk about equals. There's the energetic needs of individuals. Mr. Smith, you said the majority in certain countries don't have access to electricity. So when you look at it from the energy lens, normally if we want to give energy to people, it's to promote solar and wind energy because it's at lower cost. And we want to trade gold, oil and gas with other countries, but perhaps there are clean energies that would be more advantageous to them other than gas and oil.
My colleagues may have specific examples that they could add, but I would just say that, one of the challenges in Africa is actually, when you talk about renewables, is you can do it at a small scale. So you can have microgrids and you can apply solar and wind at a very small scale. But to do that at a much larger scale, not for commercial use, but for the population, it's very challenging. And so the transition from fossil fuels, as one MP was mentioning, this transition from oil and gas or oil to coal, with natural gas being a better choice, I think that's being looked at quite closely in many parts of Africa, where the grid doesn't allow for renewables to be applied immediately. So I'm not sure if anyone has anything to add.
20 seconds. Yeah.
Je voudrais offrir un exemple pratique.
I'll give you a practical example for this equal relationship.
Transition, which is meant to move South Africa's dependence from coal into other venues, which creates commercial opportunities for Canada. But foundational in this approach is a sovereign loan to the government of South Africa that they pay back every 6 months, which is enabling this transition, which is decommissioning coal mines, which is training a new workforce, which is dealing with significant unemployment in the country, but it's also creating opportunities in this new space.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your appearance and for your testimony today. We really appreciate it. And I now ask for unanimous consent from members to go into in-camera session so that we can have a discussion of committee business. Thank you.